So, U.S. nuclear-powered submarines are near Russia. Yeah, you heard that right. Recently, President Trump, in a post on Truth Social, claimed that he ordered 2 U.S. nuclear submarines to be moved in response to threats made by Dmitry Medvedev, who, as you probably know, is currently the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council and a close ally of Putin. But what exactly happened here? What threat is President Trump even talking about? And more importantly, how dangerous could this whole confrontation get? Let's break it down. So, the tension between President Trump and former Russian President Medvedev has been simmering for a while now, especially since that midnight U.S. operation in Iran. But things are clearly heating up. In a recent Truth Social post, President Trump said that, quote, based on the highly provocative statements of former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, he had ordered 2 U.S. nuclear submarines to be moved to the appropriate regions. Now, Trump didn't mention which regions specifically, probably because, let's be honest, U.S. subs are already everywhere. But the real question is, what exactly did Medvedev say that made Trump so angry? Well, Medvedev brought up something called the dead hand system. And if you're not familiar, that's Russia's doomsday nuclear retaliation protocol. Basically, it's a system designed to automatically launch a full-scale nuclear counterattack if Russian leadership is completely wiped out in a nuclear strike, even if their command and control is destroyed. So hypothetically, if the U.S. launched a nuclear attack that killed Putin and his entire team, the dead hand system would detect that and launch everything back at the U.S. Yeah, pretty terrifying stuff. Now, of course, President Trump, being Trump, didn't take kindly to that. He responded by saying, and I quote, "Watch your words. You're entering very dangerous territory." And then he deployed the submarines. So now it's like U.S. and Russia are handling nuclear diplomacy the same way teenagers handle drama on Instagram, except with warheads. And here's the thing. This is clearly an overreaction on President Trump's part. Yes, Medvedev's comments were provocative, but Russia is not in any position right now to start a nuclear war. Even John Bolton, President Trump's former national security advisor, called the move inappropriate and said it's very risky business.
It seems to reveal Trump doesn't really understand how our nuclear navy works and what their plan of operation is.
The reality is, President Trump doesn't like how Putin and his allies have been ignoring U.S. calls to stop the war. And let's be honest, President Trump has always had a bit of an ego. That's not news. So this whole exchange feels less like diplomacy and more like a WWE promo. President Trump has also been issuing these ultimatums to Russia lately. First, he gave Putin 50 days to end the war. Then it was 12 days. And now, the deadline's August 8th. I wouldn't be surprised if next week he says, "Putin, you've got 24 hours or I'm calling NATO and your mom." Of course, Medvedev mocked the ultimatums, calling them theatrical, and said that Russia doesn't care. Then he casually dropped the dead hand comment, like he was talking about some new iPhone feature. So yeah, in a way, that was a threat. But again, the dead hand system only activates if the entire Russian leadership is destroyed in a nuclear strike. And that's not happening. No one's preparing to nuke Russia out of the blue. Which brings us to the bigger issue here. The U.S. is acting, well, kind of childish. President Trump's bragging about nuclear subs being near Russia, calling Medvedev a failed former president, and telling him to watch his words.
No, the nuclear submarine.
Oh, yeah, well, we had to do that. We just have to be careful. And a threat was made, and we didn't think it was appropriate, so I have to be very careful. So I do that on the basis of safety for our people. A threat was made by a former president of Russia, and we're going to protect our people.
Now, if we step back and consider the power of the U.S. nuclear submarines, here's the reality. The U.S. operates 14 Ohio-class nuclear submarines, each capable of carrying multiple warheads and can hide underwater for months. And yeah, they're already patrolling near Russia, in the Arctic, the North Atlantic, even near the Kamchatka Peninsula in the Pacific. So when Trump says he's moved them, it's kind of like saying you've turned on the security camera when it's always been on. In short, this isn't really a military escalation. It's more like a public flex. A political move to say, I'm strong, I'm watching, and I've got submarines. Because realistically, U.S. missiles can hit any part of Russia, even from American waters. So we've moved subs near Russia line is just a fear tactic. But jokes aside, this is dangerous. Because when nuclear threats become part of daily political bickering, the risk of miscalculation goes way up. What if Russia responds with their own subs? What if there's an accident? A misread radar signal? This could spiral fast. And here's another scary possibility. If Russia starts feeling too provoked, they could take things to the next level, like transferring nuclear tech to Iran. Yep, that's actually possible. They could do it under a nuclear sharing treaty, and it would massively escalate tensions in the Middle East, especially for the U.S. and Israel. Remember during Operation Midnight Hammer, when the U.S. bombed Iran's nuclear sites? Medvedev claimed back then that other countries were ready to supply Iran with nukes. At that time, President Trump threatened Russia with nuclear subs too, but now he's actually taking action. Meanwhile, Russia has just deployed Orshnik hypersonic missiles in Belarus, and they recently launched a huge missile strike on Ukraine that killed over 30 civilians. Plus, Russian officials are now claiming that they have more submarines in the oceans than the U.S., and that Trump's redirected subs are already being tracked and shadowed. Now, how true that is, hard to say. But yes, Russia has powerful nuclear submarines too, and they're almost definitely lurking somewhere near American waters. Meanwhile, China's just sitting back with popcorn. Because while the U.S. and Russia toss threats and submarines at each other, Beijing is quietly watching the chaos. This is exactly the kind of moment China might use to test things around Taiwan, maybe even flex militarily. If the U.S. looks overextended and distracted, China sees opportunity. It could hurt U.S. focus on the Indo-Pacific, AUKUS, and everything else. So yeah, the situation is tight for the U.S. And to be honest, the current U.S. foreign policy is kind of all over the place. Right now, the U.S. is pushing against Russia, China, and India all at the same time. India and Russia have good ties, and India and China are also warming up a bit, especially over common frustrations with U.S. tariffs, sanctions, and dollar dominance. So yeah, U.S. foreign policy toward BRICS countries is shaky, to say the least. At the end of the day, this isn't just about two submarines. It's about tone, intent, and the mindset behind using nuclear weapons as punchlines in social media beefs. Because one wrong move, one misread radar blip, and this goes from political theater to global disaster. So, yes, President Trump might be trying to send a message to Medvedev, but he's also sending messages to Moscow, Tehran, Beijing, and the entire world. Let's just hope those messages stay above sea level and don't end with sonar pings in the Arctic. So what do you think? Is President Trump being strategically assertive or just recklessly theatrical? Let me know in the comments. And hey, take care of yourselves out there. This world's getting weird.